Coming up on the program, an incredible story of a remarkable medical achievement, a face transplant.
Support for What's Health Got to Do with It is provided in part by the American Brain Foundation invests in research across the spectrum of the brain, knowing all brain diseases, disorders, and injuries are connected. There can be no cures without research. Learn how you can make a difference today at AmericanBrainFoundation.org. Rethreaded knows human trafficking destroys lives, but they also know it's not the end of the story. Rethreaded believes in the potential and power of all survivors to reclaim their lives. Visit rethreaded.com to learn more. And Elevate Med. Through mentorship, leadership development, financial literacy, a robust peer network, and tuition-based scholarship support, Elevate Med is dedicated to the next generation of diverse physician leaders as a tangible step towards the eradication of health disparities. More at elevatemed.org.
From the moment we're born to our last breath, every American embarks on a journey through the intricate maze of the healthcare system. These are their stories, one life at a time. And a warning about this conversation, we will be talking about death by suicide. And if you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide or are in crisis, help is available. You can call or text 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org. Today we meet Andy Sandness. Andy, a 21-year-old man, survived a self-inflicted gunshot wound that left him without a nose, jaw, and much of his mid-face. Breathing and eating became surgical challenges. For years, he lived behind a prosthetic mask, avoiding mirrors and crowds. Then, after nearly a decade and a rare donor match, he underwent a groundbreaking procedure that would give him back more than a face. It would restore identity. What was the surgery? Hi, I'm Dr. Joe Sirven, a practicing neurologist at Mayo Clinic and professor of healthcare administration and policy at Arizona State University. This is What's Health Got to Do with It, which looks at where and how healthcare intersects with your life, helping you get the medical answers you want. Now let's turn our attention back to Andy. The procedure, the surgery, if you will, is a face transplant. And joining us to better tell this story is Jack Elhai. He is the author of books and articles on medicine, science, and history. He's written more than 600 articles and essays for magazines such as The Atlantic, Smithsonian, GQ, Scientific American, Wired, The Washington Post magazine, and many more publications. His books include The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, recently adapted into the movie Nuremberg, The Lobotomist, and The Lost Brothers. Mr. Elhai's latest book is Face in the Mirror by Mayo Clinic Press. He joins us from Minneapolis. Mr. Elhai, welcome to our show.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
We are excited to talk about this topic. Congratulations on this book. I'm going to start off this way. What first drew you to the subject of a face transplant, and how did you find this incredible story?
I'll answer the first part of that first. What drew me to Andy's story as a face transplant patient is what draws me to most of the stories that have attracted me, and that is the high stakes that were in play in Andy's treatment. In Andy's case, and in the case of many face transplant patients, this is a life or death matter, even though a face transplant is not necessarily a life-saving procedure. The effect that a face transplant has on the patient's life can make a huge improvement in the quality of that life later on. So that's what drew me in, the high stakes. And I found out about Andy's story more than 5 years ago now. As you mentioned, I have written some other books related to medicine and the history of medicine. And I had heard that the Mayo Clinic Press was looking for an author to write the story of Andy's life and his treatment. And so that's when I began talking with the people at the press about doing Andy's book. And I learned more about the story. What I knew initially was very superficial, really what newspaper accounts had told me. And I learned it was much more than that, that Andy is not just a person who received a face transplant, that he's a very interesting and unusual person, as is his primary surgeon in all of this, Dr. Samir Mardini. So everything just came together and amounted to what seems now to be a can't miss kind of story,
Right.
even though there were along the way many ways it could have missed, but fortunately didn't.
Jack, face transplantation, it sounds so much like science fiction. It just sounds so out there. What medical breakthroughs made this once impossible thought of a procedure a reality, if you will?
Well, the primary breakthrough that happened toward the end of the 20th century was the advent of medications that can suppress the patient's immune system. So until that time, and this affected all transplants, not just face transplants. And so before that time, patients could only safely receive tissues from their own bodies, or in a few cases from identical twins. And so the arrival of these medications that suppress the patient's immune system made possible so much. All of the organ transplants that we're familiar with, kidney, liver, heart, etc. And then later on, once the medical techniques grew even more sophisticated, these other kinds of transplants that are called VCAs, or the vascularized composite allotransplants. And these are transplants that are not just of a single organ like a liver, but of bundles of human tissue that include skin, muscles, bones, parts of the circulatory and nervous systems, so much. And you find those in face transplants and also in hand transplants.
We've done many a transplant story on the show, and they are always very captivating and very emotionally charged. But a face transplant has that extra element of a new appearance for the individual who receives it. And I'm wondering if you could comment in this case with Andy, talk about the emotional and psychological adjustments that you have to make for getting a new face.
Andy Sandness is one of the rare people who have ever lived on this planet who has had three faces. He had the face that he was born with.
Okay.
And he had that face until he shot himself in a suicide attempt at the end of 2006. And then after that, he lived for many years with a reconstructed face.
Okay.
Which tried to overcome many of the deficiencies that the gunshot wound caused, but it was still very imperfect. And then finally, he had his face transplant in 2016. So the human face is so important, and we often don't think about it. But on one level, it's how we present ourselves to the world.
Right.
It's what people remember about us when they meet us. And someone who has a critically injured or damaged or disfigured face is at a real disadvantage in that way. And often people who have those kinds of conditions isolate themselves because of it, because they don't want all the added attention that comes with a disfigured face. They feel bad about themselves. They don't want to leave home. And so a face transplant can overcome much of that.
Mm.
And it's extremely important to the mental health of the patient in that regard. But one of the things that I learned as a result of working on this book and working with Andy and Dr. Mardini is that appearance is only part of the story
Okay.
and only part of what's being treated in a face transplant. Even more important, I think, to Andy, is the function of the face,
I see.
because the face is how we use the face to eat, to express emotion, to do other things like kiss. Someone with a damaged face may have a lot of trouble, as Andy did, swimming, or taking part in other activities that we love to do. And one of the really miraculous things about Andy's face transplant is that he has recovered so much of his facial function, probably something like 98% of it, in addition to receiving this wonderful looking new face. I think that Andy's quite a good looking guy now. I think he looks a lot like the actor Matt Damon.
Wow. What are some of the biggest ethical questions that surround the idea of a face transplant? I mean, how do you navigate, how do the physicians and folks navigate who gets one and the donation part of this? If you could explain that, that would be wonderful, just to help us all better understand.
Sure. The process of who gets a face transplant is quite complex, and it was in Andy's case too, because somebody needs to be not only medically and physically eligible for a face transplant, but also psychologically
Yeah.
eligible, and that is because of the, in part because of the suppression of the immune system that comes with any kind of transplant. The person needs to take these suppressive medications for the rest of their life, and to do it religiously. There can't be any skip days, and also restricted in some other ways. Like I know Andy needs to avoid sunlight because of his suppressed immune
Oh,
system.
wow.
That any small skin cancer that might develop on his face, his body is not well equipped to fight against. So, so there are those psychological aspects too. And in Andy's case, there was another psychological aspect to be dealt with, and that was the recognition that he was in this position to begin with,
That's right.
because he had attempted suicide.
That's right.
And the last thing that anybody would want is that somebody like him goes through the arduous process of having a face transplant, and his surgeons go, and the whole medical staff going through the very arduous procedure of performing a face transplant, only to have at the end a patient who may be doing well physically, but still feels depressed and suicidal. So all of that played into examining whether Andy was the right kind of patient for a face transplant. And then you brought up the matter of donors, and face transplants are in a different position than in donating other kinds of body parts and organs. So in many, perhaps most or all states of the US, there are checkoffs as part of the driver's license registration system, where people can indicate whether they would want their organs used in the case of their death, to be given to another person. But those checkoffs don't normally include face transplants,
Right.
because it's it's in a different category. It affects if a donor gives a face, it affects the appearance of that person's body, and the family survivors of the donor have to think about a part of their loved one's body being visible there on the outside of another person. A donated heart or kidney is not visible or recognizable, whereas a donor's face is visible, probably not recognizable, but still it's
Right.
out there for other people to see. So all of that comes into play, and it can get quite complicated in dealing with the families and survivors of potential face donors and whether they want that to happen.
And to all of our listeners out there, you're listening to What's Health Got to Do with It on WJCT News 89.9. I'm Dr. Joe Sirven, and if you're just joining us, we're in conversation with author Jack L. High and the story of Mayo Clinic's first face transplant. And we want to hear from you. Tag me on social media at JServin. Jack, were there moments in this remarkable story that really floored you or surprised you, whether the medical portion, the patient portion, or something else? Was there some piece that really, just kind of, I think, would surprise us as we listen to it, that as you were working through your research on this?
I was prepared to be surprised because I didn't know very much about face transplants before getting into this. But one aspect that really did floor me, even though I was prepared to be floored, still took me by surprise, was all of the intense preparation that went into Andy's face transplant by the medical team at the Mayo Clinic. And they rehearsed for years
Wow.
on weekends on cadaver heads in order to learn the techniques and to get them right. And then the transplant surgery itself took 56 hours.
Did you say
Oh,
56 straight
yes,
hours?
yes, continuous hours over a long weekend. Um, and and was so complex that it was hard for me to grasp. And one thing that helped me grasp it was that I was fortunate that the Mayo Clinic and Andy made available to me Andy's full medical record, so that I could go in there and see the minute by minute accounts of what was happening during that surgery. Unfortunately, that medical record, in Andy's case, is 80,000 pages long.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
And so
goodness.
it took me months to go through it and to pull out the parts that would be of interest to readers and that were usable for the book. And there was a great deal that wouldn't be. And to isolate that, and I knew from the beginning that the surgery itself would be a centerpiece of the book, and that my challenge was to describe it accurately and in a way that people could understand it. And having that medical record, in addition to interviewing so many of the people who took part in the surgery, really enabled me to get that down on paper into the book.
How is Andy doing now? Do you know?
Yes, he's doing very, very well. So it's now 2025, about 9 years past his
Wow.
face transplant, and he looks wonderful. And readers can see on the cover
Yeah.
what he looks
Yeah.
like, and it looks very good. His health is excellent. He has not had significant problems from the suppression of his immune system. As the book goes into, Andy ended up marrying one of his Mayo Clinic nurses, And so they are married.
Wow.
They have 2 children now. And so this is a really unusual, remarkable part of Andy's recovery too. So Andy's faring very well. And the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, capitalized on their knowledge, what they gained and learned from Andy's face transplant, and have since performed a second one that has also, to this time, been going very well.
Let me ask you, you said that there's also remarkable aspects about the surgeon. What can you tell us about that? I'm still trying to get past the 56-hour operation continuous. What can you tell us about that part of the story?
Dr. Mardini was present and working in that surgery for almost all of those 56 hours. I think he took a 4-hour break at one point.
Wow.
So he was in there for the long haul. He is such an unusual and wonderful person, and his level of caring for Andy, as I'm sure it is for all of his patients, is so great. Dr. Mardini was born in Lebanon, and when he was a child, his parents moved the family to the U.S., so he grew up in the U.S. And he came to plastic surgery not with a direct intention. He was originally interested in pediatric cardiology, as his father had worked in. But he became exposed to plastic surgery while he was a resident and was really drawn into it. And so he did intensive training in the US and also in Taiwan, and came back to the US and never dreamed that he would work at a place like the Mayo Clinic. And I mean that in the sense that he knew that he would always knew that he would work in a high quality, well equipped medical facility, but in the upper Midwest with below zero temperatures, no, he never imagined that part of it. And but he was so taken in by the people he met when he was interviewing at the clinic, and how they operate, how they work together. Things are very collaborative, which appealed to him, that he decided to take the position.
Jack, I'm going to let that be our final word. I want to thank you for writing this book. This is absolutely fascinating, riveting, I'd say, and appreciate you putting all this to page. I think the listeners are going to enjoy reading this book.
Thank you. I hope so. I enjoyed learning and from it and writing it. It certainly changed me, and I think it will have that effect on a lot of readers.
We've been talking to author Jack L. High. He's the author of the new book, Face in the Mirror, a surgeon, a patient, and the remarkable story of the first face transplant at Mayo Clinic. Up next, from restoring a face and a life through the miracle of transplant surgery, we shift to another frontier of healing. And we'll be right back. Hey, it's Dr. Joe Sirven. I have a new show called This Week in Health, and it's part of WJCT News Now. Local news you can listen to anytime, anywhere. When you sign up, you'll unlock 4 local podcasts delivered straight to your podcast app. I break down the week's biggest health headlines and what they mean for you. Start a free 30-day trial at wjct.org/newsnow. And if you like it, become a monthly donor to support WJCT Public Media. Welcome back to What's Health Got to Do with It. I'm Dr. Joe Sirven, and from the groundbreaking possibilities of face transplantation, a true triumph of surgical innovation, we turn now to another frontier in healing: the power of newborn genomic testing. It's a technology offering answers before symptoms even begin, and sometimes when seconds matter most. Let's meet Colin and Lily and their baby Margot. At just 6 weeks old, baby Margot began experiencing seizures. Her parents had enrolled her in a newborn genome screening study shortly after birth, almost as an afterthought. When Margot's genetic results came back, they revealed a rare diagnosis that not only explained her seizures, but changed her medical care and her life. What rare condition was found through Margot's early genetic testing? Well, in the earliest days of Margot's life, a single, almost casual decision to enroll in a newborn genome study became the lifeline her family never imagined they'd need. When seizures struck at just 6 weeks old, the results arrived just in time, revealing a rare condition called CDKL5 deficiency disorder. Today, Lily is joining us to share her story, a story of fear, resilience, and the fierce, tender love that she and husband Colin have for their daughter. She's joining us from New York City. And then we will also be having the Senior Vice President of Medical Affairs of GeneDx joining us from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Welcome both to our program. I'm going to start with you, Lily. Take us back to the day Margot was born. Just walk us through that.
Margot is my first baby. We had just welcomed her through a very stormy night, and she was perfect, beautiful. She'd passed all her screenings. I was so sleep deprived in those first moments that I put the diaper on backwards. Nurse came in and said, "Oh, first time mom, huh?" It was, humbling, funny, sort of the moment that I think captures as a new parent just kind of how unprepared you are, but how excited as a new parent it can be.
What went through your mind when you were asked about enrolling her in the Guardian study, which is the study that looks at this genome testing for a newborn?
This was really a low stakes, non-momentous decision for us. We were in the room recovering. Someone came in, explained this, and it was routine. It seemed like a very low stakes decision to make, and sort of like the first easy yes, I think, as you're starting off your new parenting journey. It was kind of abstract, like almost optional. And in hindsight, it's probably one of the more critical decisions, if not the most critical decisions we ended up making in those early days.
When Margot first started having seizures, I think it was before the genetic results arrived. Talk to us a little bit about that uncertainty, and then what happens when you get the diagnosis.
Yeah, Margot started having seizures when she was 5-6 weeks old.
Okay.
And it came out of nowhere. And that fear was visceral. When you watch your baby or any loved one, when you watch them have seizures, for me, it's like a physical feeling. It feels like someone is reaching into my chest and just like squeezing my heart. It's terrifying. I have all of these videos from the early seizures where I was trying to document exactly what was going on, and you can hear me in the background saying, it's okay, which is clearly for my benefit, not the newborns. It's really terrifying. And the crazy thing is that many parents in the rare disease community actually live in that fear and limbo for a really long time.
Yeah.
And not knowing what's going on is just paralyzing emotionally, even physically. So she went from being perfect to went to the emergency room. You've never been admitted so quickly as when you have a 6-week-old seizing,
Right.
and spending weeks in the emergency room trying to figure out what's going on.
How did life change by having that early diagnosis? I know as a neurologist, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of people that have a situation where they have a seizing child or loved one, and they have no idea what exactly is the cause. But you had a diagnosis. Talk a little bit about that, getting that diagnosis.
We were only in limbo, or what parents refer to as the diagnostic odyssey, for only a matter of weeks. And I can't imagine what it's like to be in that for years. I mean, fear is devastating. Limbo is really uncomfortable. We were chasing every possible explanation, not sleeping, reading everything we could about epilepsy online. And when you have a diagnosis and information, it turns chaos into purpose. It creates clarity that really matters for your course of action, and giving you agency and some, semblance of control in that uncertainty is extremely powerful in the early days, just from, an emotional reframing perspective at a minimum. But then, very importantly, it has also very practical considerations for how you're actually going to approach treatment and how you're going to approach life. It gives you a perspective based on what you can find out from other families with the diagnosis around what life can look like. It's incredibly comforting to the parents, and it's incredibly important for the decisions you make with respect to the medical care for your child to have the right diagnosis. In Margot's case, it's a lifelong condition, there's no cure. But if you can imagine the case where there's early treatment options and disease modifying therapeutics out there, it's really life and death in some cases. And that's not an exaggeration if you have a neurodegenerative condition. So clarity really matters. We had a number of things we could do with specialists, physical therapies, medication strategies. We met with one of the world's leading neurologists in New York City who happens to be specialized in CDKL5. He's also an absolute gem of a human. And he had a really unique early insight into a new drug that was being used, and it gave Margot seizure control within a month.
Wow.
And that is super unique and rare in CDKL5 as well. And let us kind of reclaim what normalcy could look like within this condition. So knowing the diagnosis is critical on so many levels, from your course of treatment, medical practicalities, specialists, to the emotional healing really that you need to start to recover on when you're in this sort of rare disease world.
Lily, given that you ended up with a diagnosis that does falls under the rare disease category, I imagine getting this diagnosis also gave you an immediate community of support. Can you comment on that?
Dr. Sirven, that's one of the more important life rafts in all of this, is the community of support. Having a kid with a rare disease can be very isolating. It's just hard for those around you to empathize on the level that you're at, because they've never had to go through that. And it can be hard to maintain, relationships and connectivity to those around you who seem to just be now in a totally different world. The world pre-diagnosis and pre-seizures versus, that outside world you're no longer a part of. No one understands what having this type of situation is like other parents.
Understood.
Community is really important, I think, when you go through any sort of trauma or grief. And this shared language of seizures and feeding tubes and supplements and therapies is really, really helpful for practicalities. But then, in the really early days, one mom told me, try and enjoy your baby, which is basic, of course, but at the time we were afraid, we were angry, we were grieving. And that was an incredibly helpful piece of advice because, we were going to miss out on Margot's baby days if we let the diagnosis kind of take over. So community helps in ways that, like the medical system can't, all the people who love you in your life can't. And that is really, really important.
Lily, I want to ask you, can you comment a little bit about, now in retrospect, if other parents are facing a similar situation or decision, you said it was low stakes to do genomic testing at that time. It was the study because it's just this blood draw. But what would you want to comment about new parents to know about newborn genetic or genomic testing, if you will, that, if they are like your past selves in that hospital room, that they should know before saying, yeah, go ahead and do it or don't do it?
I would just say, don't wait. You don't think you need it until you do. And then by then you've already lost precious time. It's really not about fear. Knowledge is power, and it's about empowerment. And genomic testing gives you the tools via information to fight for your child, to fight for your loved one. I tell myself, you made the right choice without a doubt. You said yes to something, or you're going to say yes to something that is going to save you weeks, if not months of pain. Give your child a better chance. And, I think that Guardian has a very, very high enrollment rate. And it would probably be 100% if you weren't talking to people who just gave birth within the last 24 hours and were a little less sleep deprived. It is an incredibly powerful tool to have.
I have one quick question before we go to Dr. Johnson. Let me ask you, how is Margot now?
So Margot turned 2 last week.
Wow.
And, we call her Margolina, Pinky Boo Boo, Little Muffin. And she is really incredible. She's so determined. She works so hard at everything. She's kind of relaxed as a kid. She's really curious. She can be endlessly chatty. She vocalizes with sounds. When she doesn't smile much. These kids can have limited smiling or laughing, but when she does, it's like, the sun coming out on a cloudy day. It's really incredible to watch. And she's really the world's best snuggler. And when things seem hard or feel hard or are hard, nothing can make it as better as a little snuggle from Pinky Boo Boo.
I love that. And to all of our listeners, you're listening to What's Health Got to Do with It on WJCT News 89.9. If you're just joining us, we're talking about genomic testing in newborns and how it helps us all. And we want to hear from you. Tag us on social media at @JSirven. Lily, hang on there. I'm going to ask some questions for Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Johnson, you just heard Lily give a very poignant description of how this really matters. So for families like Lily and Margot, how has newborn genomic testing changed how we diagnose rare conditions compared to what was there before?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know on average that patients with rare disease can undergo a diagnostic odyssey of around 5 years, maybe even longer, where during that time they can undergo numerous tests, see multiple specialists, and can experience multiple or really prolonged hospitalizations, right? And with genomic newborn screening, we can essentially shorten that time to a diagnosis to a few weeks. And even in many cases, we can make these diagnoses before the newborn even has the symptoms. So in those babies, we have essentially eliminated that diagnostic odyssey. And one thing to note too is with genomic newborn screening, we're also able to screen for many more conditions than what is currently available through the traditional newborn screening that's happening in the public health labs today. And it can still be all performed using the original dried blood spot card that's collected on almost every newborn in this country, or we could do it through a simple cheek swab.
Okay.
Now, as part of the Guardian study that we were involved with, right, when we looked at the pilot, or at least the first 4,000 babies that were tested in this study, compared to traditional newborn screening, for those conditions that are offered on the traditional newborn screening, we were able to detect all of those conditions through the genomic newborn screening that we performed. We also know that when babies are screening positive with the genomic newborn screening, it's an extremely high percentage of them that are turning out to really have that condition, and it's higher than what we see with traditional newborn screening. Also, what we found is that because we were able to detect or to test or screen for a larger set of conditions on the genomic newborn screening panel, we found that 92% of those newborns that received a positive result were for conditions that aren't on the current traditional newborn screening.
Interesting. I'm curious about this. So, like, one of the big questions that a lot of folks always have anytime that we've covered topics about genomic testing on the show is just balancing, because it sounds like you get a lot of information. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that balancing between that early knowledge and the emotional well-being that comes with knowing whatever it is that you find.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a really great question. I think one of the things is it's really critical to be carefully selecting the genes and conditions that are being screened for on the genomic newborn screening. And it's very done similarly to how we're selecting them for traditional newborn screening. So for example, these conditions are what we would consider to be really severe and early onset. So we're not talking about giving back information for adult onset conditions like a cancer risk,
Sure.
in an adult age. So we want to make sure that we're really reporting on things that are going to have an impact very soon and very early in that child's life. And we also want to make sure that there are conditions where there's, if we identify that the newborn has that condition, there is a very, very high chance that that baby is going to present with that condition. So these aren't risk factors.
Right.
These are conditions that are happening. And also we make sure that the conditions are actionable, as we call them, right? There's therapies or other things that can be done maybe to screen for or monitor or manage these newborns for potential symptoms that might arise. But there's things that we can do if we have that knowledge, and we can intervene early and help give that diagnosis to the family and help eliminate the diagnostic odyssey.
Dr. Johnson, one of the other, I mean, we this is a healthcare show, and I have to ask, what about the cost of this stuff? Is this insurance covered? Is this a high copay? Is this an extra? How does that work?
Sure, that's a great question. So at least for the Guardian study that we were part of, this is part of a research
Okay,
study.
got it.
So it's done through a research protocol. So no cost to the family. I will say in general, the cost of genomic sequencing and this type of technology has come down tremendously in the last couple of decades now. And I think we're getting to a place where it is not quite there at the same level of cost as a traditional newborn screening test, but I think we're within reach and it's getting close.
What big innovations? I mean, do you see this becoming a standard of care, if you will, in delivery areas all over the U.S.? How if you had a crystal ball as you look at this, how do you see this evolving for all our listeners out there that maybe they're having a baby or looking in the future? How do you see this evolving? Because this is pretty powerful technology.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that at GeneDx, we've been a part of 2 large research studies, and to date, we've screened over 18,000 newborns.
Wow.
So we know this is doable. We know it's sufficient. And I'm really hopeful as well, but we also, we believe that there is a future where every newborn can have access to this type of genomic newborn screening at birth, because of this promise that we're finding, that it holds to really reduce the diagnostic odyssey for so many children. I don't think that we're at the point, with next year that it's going to be widely adopted. I think it's still a few years down the road, but we're really excited about all of the research that is going on in this space to really learn and be thoughtful about how we could implement this in the most medically responsible way.
I want to give each of you, Dr. Johnson, you, Lily, a chance for a last point, a message to our listeners on this topic. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Johnson. What if a listener's out there, maybe they're expecting, maybe a loved one's expecting, or something along those lines, what message do you want to take home from having this available for our listeners? And then we'll go to Lily for our final word.
Sure. I would say, I know one of the kind of conversations out there are around what are the ethical implications of, doing this type of genomic sequencing in newborns. And what I would like to just encourage listeners to think about is, let's ask ourselves, what are the ethics of not implementing genomic newborn screening for these conditions that we don't currently have a screening modality in the newborn period, where we know that the conditions are treatable, but by not screening for them currently, we're essentially putting these children with these conditions on a long diagnostic odyssey, when we know that we could really shorten that for families.
Lily, I'm going to let you have the final word. What message do you have for that any you want to give to perhaps expectant parents, or any message you just want on this topic? Let you have the final word on this.
Yeah, so for expectant, maybe Dr. Sirven, you'll let me give a word to expectant parents
Sure.
separately from a word to other listeners. But for expectant parents, I would say that, having kids is chaos. There's no control in that. You take your heart out of your body, you put it on your sleeve, and you expose this really important part of you, the most important part of you, to just the chaos of the world. And these kinds of tests provide control, not in the sense of like reclaiming it, but in the sense of, reclaiming some of it. Getting a diagnosis gives you agency, and puts you on the path for resilience, and then hopefully gratitude for the life that you end up having, and science community, doctors, GeneDx, the labs, and your baby. And then my other message for other listeners who may be healthcare officials, government officials, is that we really have a moral imperative to make this the standard of care for newborn screening at the delivery room. The moral imperative for what the outcome can be is incredible. We have, thankfully, a condition that has a long life outlook, but there can be prevention of infant loss depending on the types of genetic conditions that these tests can screen for, with real interventions that early on can have an absolute impact. And the cost, as Dr. Johnson has said, has come down. And there are, it's not an apples to apples comparison to just compare the cost of the genomic sequencing to the standard newborn screening. We had a 2-week hospitalization. It's incredibly costly. We did every single test under the sun. It's incredibly costly. And of course, it's an emotional cost. So I would urge the community from a policy perspective to be at the forefront in your states and in your cities of adopting this very powerful technology that will have a very significant impact on your communities.
I'm going to let that be our very last word. I want to thank you, Lily, for being so kind enough to share your story with Margot. I only wish you the best as well as you move forward. And Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for giving us the context of how this works. God bless to both of you guys for the work and support on this incredibly important technology. And thanks so much for sharing all of this with our listeners today.
Thank you, Dr. Sirven.
Thank you.
You bet. Well, that's our program for today. We hope you've enjoyed our show. If you missed anything, you can listen to the full episode at wjct.org and on your favorite podcast app. Thanks to all of our guests. Our executive producer is David Luckin. Stacey Bennett is our producer. Brady Coram is our director. Caden Collins and Caroline Kahn are our researchers. If you have questions about this or any topic, let us know by calling us at 904-358-6362, email us at health@wjct.org, or tag us on social media at @jsirven. I'm Dr. Joe Sirven, and you're listening to What's Health Got to Do with It on WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Thank you for listening, and stay in touch.
Support for What's Health Got to Do with It is provided in part by the American Brain Foundation invests in research across the spectrum of the brain, knowing all brain diseases, disorders, and injuries are connected. There can be no cures without research. Learn how you can make a difference today at AmericanBrainFoundation.org. Rethreaded needs you to make a difference in the lives of human trafficking survivors. Learn more about supportive services and an array of survivor-made products at rethreaded.com. And by Neurelis, a leading neuroscience company focused on the development and commercialization of therapeutics for the treatment of epilepsy and other neurologic disorders. The company's unique drug portfolios strive to address unmet needs in patient care. Learn more at Neurelis.com.